In ancient Egypt, the god Osiris was murdered, dismembered, scattered across the earth, and then pieced back together and brought to life. In the Gospel of John, Lazarus lies dead in a tomb for 4 days, until a voice calls him forth, risen. And Neville Goddard, standing in a rented hall in Los Angeles in 1948, tells a room full of seekers, "You must die to the old state to be reborn into the new." 3 stories, 3 traditions, 1 instruction. What if death, in the mystical sense, was never about the body at all? What if resurrection wasn't a singular miracle promised to one man 2,000 years ago, but a repeating pattern woven into the structure of consciousness itself? A pattern you enact every time you let go of who you were to become who you imagine yourself to be. Tonight, we're going all the way into what Neville actually taught about death, rebirth, and resurrection, not as metaphor, not as poetry, as method. And we're going to trace that teaching through the Osiris-Lazarus-Christ pattern that appears again and again in his lectures, through the astrological symbolism of Saturn, the planet of death and time, and through the mystery that Neville returned to over and over in his later years, that resurrection is not something that happens to you. It is something you are. Welcome to Neville Goddard Universe. I'm glad you're here. This channel exists because Neville's teaching doesn't belong to one tradition. It belongs to all of them. It's a living system of truth that resonates across the great esoteric and mystical streams of the world. And every time we place Neville beside one of those streams, whether it's Hermeticism, Kabbalah, Vedanta, the Tarot, or tonight, the archetypal language of death and resurrection found in myth, astrology, and the Gospels, we see the same truth reflected back at us from 1,000 different angles. Tonight's episode matters because Neville's language of death and rebirth is one of the most misunderstood parts of his teaching. People hear "die to the old state" and think it's a nice turn of phrase. But Neville meant it literally, psychologically literally. He was describing the actual mechanics of transformation. He was telling you that every shift in identity, every movement from one state of consciousness to another, follows the same pattern: death, burial, and resurrection. It's not symbolic. It's structural. And when you place that teaching beside the ancient myths of Osiris, the raising of Lazarus, the Saturn return in astrology, and the alchemical cycle of dissolution and rebirth, you realize humanity has been encoding this truth for millennia. Neville didn't invent it, he remembered it. And then he gave it back to us in the plainest possible language. Assume you are the person you want to be, and let the old you die. If this exploration speaks to something in you, if you've clicked on this video because you sense there's more to resurrection than Sunday school ever told you, then I invite you to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It's a small thing, but it tells the algorithm that this work matters, and it keeps these conversations alive. I'm grateful for every mind that walks this path with us. Now, let's go deeper. Let's start with Neville himself, in his own words, from a lecture he gave in the 1940s. He said, "You cannot take your new concept of self into the old state. You must die to the old to be born into the new. And this death is not the death of the body. It is the death of a belief, the death of a self-concept, the death of an identity you have outgrown." Notice the precision of that language. Neville doesn't say, change your mind, or shift your perspective. He says, die. He says, be born. He's using the language of transformation that every mystical tradition has used when it wants to point to something total, something irreversible, something that cannot be undone by going backward. And he means it literally, not in the physical sense, but in the psychological sense, which for Neville is the only sense that matters. Because consciousness is the only reality. The body doesn't die and resurrect. Consciousness does. The self-concept dies. The old story dies. The person you believed yourself to be is laid in a tomb, and after a period of stillness, what Neville calls the Sabbath, the interval, you rise as someone new. This is not poetry. This is instruction. Let me give you an example Neville used repeatedly. A woman comes to him and says, "I am poor. I am struggling. I am alone. And Neville says to her, then you must die to that woman. You cannot carry her into wealth. You cannot carry her into love. She must cease to be. And how does she die? Not by effort, not by fighting herself, but by assumption, by daring to feel herself into a state so completely that the old state has nowhere left to live. She imagines herself as the woman who is secure, who is loved, who is provided for, and she dwells there until the old identity, starved of attention, simply dissolves. That dissolution is death. That imaginal act is burial. And the moment the outer world reflects the new state back to her, when the check arrives, when the proposal comes, when the evidence appears, that is resurrection. Neville said it this way in The Law and the Promise. You are resurrected into the image you have assumed. The tomb is the imaginal act. The stone is rolled away when assumption becomes fact. Now here's what's crucial. Neville didn't treat this as a one-time event. He treated it as the pattern of all transformation. Every time you move from one state to another, from lack to abundance, from sickness to health, from loneliness to love, you are enacting death and resurrection. You are Lazarus. You are Christ. You are the phoenix rising from ash. And he went further. In his later lectures, especially in the 1960s, Neville began to speak of a deeper resurrection, not just the resurrection of the self-concept into a new condition, but the resurrection of the self into the awareness of its own divinity. He called this the promise. It was no longer about getting what you want. It was about waking up to what you are. He described it as a sequence of mystical experiences, the birth from above, the discovery of the fatherhood of God, the splitting of the curtain, the ascent up the spine like a fiery serpent. And he said, this is the resurrection spoken of in Scripture. Not a man rising from a grave, but your own. I am rising into the knowledge of itself as God. But even this ultimate resurrection, Neville said, follows the same pattern. You must die to the human self, not destroy it, but see through it, to be reborn into the divine self. You must let the limited you be crucified, so the infinite you can rise. And here's the thread that runs through all of it. From the smallest revision to the final awakening, consciousness moves by death and rebirth. It cannot move any other way. You cannot become something new without ceasing to be something old. And this is not loss. This is the only real gain there is. Neville put it beautifully in a lecture from 1969. He said, do not be afraid to die daily. Die to your doubts. Die to your fears. Die to the small story you tell about yourself. Because every death in consciousness is a doorway. And on the other side of that doorway is the you that you have been imagining all along. So when Neville says, die to the old state to be reborn into the new, he's not speaking metaphorically. He's giving you the blueprint of transformation. And that blueprint is older than Neville. It's older than the Gospels. It's as old as consciousness itself. Now let's widen the lens. Because the pattern Neville is describing, death, burial, resurrection, appears in nearly every mystical and initiatory tradition in the world. And when you place them side by side, you realize they're all saying the same thing. Let's start with Osiris, the Egyptian god of death and rebirth. The myth goes like this. Osiris is killed by his brother Set, his body dismembered and scattered across Egypt. His wife Isis gathers the pieces, reassembles him, and breathes life back into him. Osiris rises, not to his old life, but to a new one. He becomes the lord of the underworld, the judge of souls, the king of the afterlife. On the surface, it's a story about a god. But to the initiates of the Egyptian mysteries, it was a map of consciousness. Osiris is you. The dismemberment is the scattering of your attention, your identity, across 1,000 false beliefs. Isis, the divine feminine, the power of imagination, gathers you back together. And the resurrection is the moment you realize, I am not the scattered pieces. I am the one who was never truly divided. Now turn to the Gospel of John, chapter 11. Lazarus has died. He's been in the tomb for 4 days. His sisters are weeping. And Jesus, the embodied I Am, stands before the tomb and says, "Lazarus, come forth." And Lazarus walks out, still wrapped in his burial cloths, alive. Neville loved this story. He returned to it again and again, and he always said the same thing. Lazarus is not a man. Lazarus is a state. The tomb is the imaginal act. The 4 days are the interval, the Sabbath. And the voice that calls Lazarus forth is your own assumption, spoken with the authority of the I Am. He said it this way in a 1963 lecture. You are Lazarus. You have been dead to your desire. You have been entombed in the belief that it cannot be. But when you hear the voice, your own inner conviction, say, "It is finished," you rise, you come forth, and the world must reflect it. Now here's the convergence. Osiris and Lazarus are the same archetype. One is Egyptian, one is Hebraic, but both are teaching the same process. You die to the old. You are gathered back together by the power of imagination, and you rise into the new. And then there's Christ. Not the historical figure, though Neville revered the story, but the Christ as the pattern of the awakened self. Paul says in Galatians, "I am crucified with Christ, nevertheless I live, yet not I, but Christ liveth in me." That's not theology, that's psychology. The small I is crucified. It dies to its limitations, its fears, its separation. And the infinite I, the Christ, the I Am, rises in its place. Neville said, "Christ is not a person, Christ is a pattern. And the pattern is this. The human imagination, awake to its own divinity, dies to the world of limitation and rises as the creator of worlds. One archetype, one instruction, die to the false self. Be reborn as the true self. It's Osiris, it's Lazarus, it's Christ, it's you. Now, let's bring in Saturn. Because astrology, especially the symbolism of Saturn, maps this same cycle onto time itself. In astrology, Saturn is the planet of death, limitation, structure, and time. It rules boundaries, endings, karma, the consequences of the past. It's the old king, the grim reaper, the lord of the grave. And every 29.5 years, Saturn returns to the exact position it was in when you were born. This is called the Saturn return. And it is, without exception, a period of death and rebirth. The first Saturn return happens around age 29. It's the death of youth, the end of wandering, the moment when life asks, who are you actually going to be? The second happens around 58. It's the death of the middle years, the shedding of roles that no longer fit. And if you live long enough, the third return at 87 is the final stripping away, the preparation for the ultimate transition. But here's what makes Saturn so profound in the context of Neville's teaching. Saturn doesn't destroy you. Saturn reveals you. It kills what is false so that what is true can stand. It is the tomb. It is the interval. It is the pressure that forces the resurrection. Neville never spoke extensively about astrology in his lectures, but the pattern he describes, the rhythm of dying to live, the cyclical nature of transformation, is Saturn's work. And if you've ever been through a Saturn return, you know exactly what Neville means when he says, you must die to the old state. Because Saturn gives you no choice. It takes the old state from you whether you're ready or not. And then it waits to see what you will assume in its place. The esoteric tradition says this: Saturn is the threshold guardian. It is the planet that initiates. And initiation always follows the same structure: death, descent, and return. You go into the underworld, the dark night of the soul, the tomb, the Sabbath, and you come back changed. You come back as someone who knows that the self is not fixed, that identity is not permanent, that consciousness can die and rise at will. And that's what Neville is teaching. Not that Saturn controls you, but that the cycle Saturn represents is the same cycle consciousness itself follows every time it transforms. You don't need to wait for a Saturn return to enact resurrection. You can do it tonight. You can do it now. Because resurrection is not astrological. It's not historical. It's not mythological. Resurrection is you, in your own imagination, daring to die to who you were and rise as who you choose to be. That's the thumbnail. That's the truth. Resurrection is you. So how do you do it? How do you actually die to the old state and rise into the new? Let me walk you through the process, step by step, the way Neville taught it. First, identify the state you want to die to. Not the circumstances. The state. The identity. The self-concept. Maybe it's, I am struggling. Maybe it's, I am unworthy. Maybe it's, I am stuck. Name it clearly. You cannot bury what you will not see. Second, construct the scene that implies the death of that state. This is where Neville's method becomes precise. You don't imagine the new state directly, not yet. You imagine the evidence that the old state is over. You imagine the moment when someone says to you, "You've really changed." You imagine yourself looking back and thinking, "I can't believe I ever felt that way." You imagine the relief, the lightness, the sense that something has ended. This is the burial. This is the imaginal act. You are placing the old self in the tomb. Third, rest. Neville called this the Sabbath. After the imaginal act, you do nothing. You don't check for results. You don't worry. You don't try to make it happen. You rest in the knowledge that it is done. This is the interval. This is the stillness between death and resurrection. And it is sacred. Do not disturb it. Fourth, assume the feeling of the new state. Now you shift. You feel yourself as the person who has risen. You don't think about it. You feel it. You wear it like a suit of clothes. You inhabit it fully. And you do this not once but repeatedly, until the new state feels more natural than the old one ever did. Let me give you a concrete example. Let's say the old state is, I am always overlooked. The scene that implies its death might be this. You imagine a colleague or a friend saying to you with genuine surprise, "Everyone's been talking about you." You've really stepped into your own. You hear the words. You feel the warmth of being seen. You let it sink in. That's the burial of the old state. Then you rest. You don't go looking for evidence. You don't wonder when it will happen. You simply know it's done. And then, in your daily inner conversation, while you're making coffee, while you're walking, while you're falling asleep, you assume the feeling of being someone who is seen, who is valued, who is known. You don't force it. You inhabit it. You let it become the atmosphere you live in. And then, at some point, maybe a week from now, maybe a month, the world will reflect it. Someone will notice you. Someone will speak up for you. An opportunity will come. And that is the resurrection. Not a miracle, not luck, the natural outpicturing of the state you have assumed. Now, here's where the traditions we've explored tonight deepen the practice. If you understand the Osiris myth, you know that Isis doesn't force Osiris back to life. She gathers him. She tends to him. She breathes into him. This is the work of imagination, patient, loving, persistent. If you understand Lazarus, you know that he was called forth by a voice that had authority. Your inner speech must carry that same authority. Speak to yourself as the I am, not as the beggar. If you understand Saturn, you know that the death is sometimes forced upon you by circumstance. When life takes something from you, a job, a relationship, a version of yourself you've outgrown, don't resist it. Let it be the tomb. Let it be the initiation. And then assume the new. This is the method. And it works because it is not your method. It is the method. It is the way consciousness has always moved, in every tradition, in every age, in every human being who has ever transformed. Neville said, try it. I say the same. Try it tonight. Identify the state you want to die to. Construct the scene that implies its death. Rest in the Sabbath. Assume the resurrection. And watch what happens. Now let's zoom out. Because there's something profound happening here, something larger than technique. What does it mean that traditions separated by continents and centuries keep arriving at the same pattern? That the Egyptians encoded it in the myth of Osiris, that the Hebrews encoded it in the raising of Lazarus, that the early Christians encoded it in the crucifixion and resurrection of Christ, that the astrologers encoded it in the cycle of Saturn, and that Neville Goddard, standing in a 20th century lecture hall, taught it as the mechanics of assumption. It means this: consciousness itself operates by death and rebirth. It's not a metaphor, it's not a cultural artifact. It's the structure of transformation. And every time a human being wakes up to their own creative power, whether they're an Egyptian priest, a Christian mystic, or a modern seeker sitting in front of a screen, they discover the same truth: you cannot become new without letting the old die. And the reason this pattern repeats across every tradition is because it's not a teaching. It's a recognition. It's the shape of the journey that every consciousness takes when it moves from ignorance to awakening, from limitation to freedom, from the belief that you are the body to the knowledge that you are the I Am. Neville understood this. He didn't present his teaching as original. He presented it as remembrance. He said, "This is what the ancients knew. This is what the mystics taught. This is what Scripture has always been saying. And now I am telling it to you in the plainest possible terms. You are the operant power. You are the resurrection and the life." And when you place Neville beside Osiris, beside Lazarus, beside Saturn, you see it clearly. These are not separate teachings. They are one teaching, translated into different languages, encoded in different symbols, handed down through different lineages. But the core is identical: die to the false, rise as the true. And here's why that matters. Because if the pattern is universal, then so is your power. You are not learning a technique invented by one man in one century. You are aligning yourself with the way reality works. You are stepping into a current that has been running since the beginning of time. And that current is this: consciousness creates. And to create anew, it must first let go of the old. This is the deeper implication of resurrection. It's not something that happened to Jesus. It's not something that happened to Lazarus. It's something that is happening right now in you, every time you dare to assume a new state. And the world, this vast, infinite, responsive world, will always, always reflect it back. So here's what I want you to take from this. Resurrection is not waiting for you in some distant future. It's not locked in a tomb 2,000 years old. It's here. It's now. It's you. Every time you let go of an old belief, you are Osiris, gathered back together. Every time you hear your own inner voice call you forth into a new state, you are Lazarus, walking out of the grave. Every time you die to limitation and rise as the creator of your world, you are Christ, crucified and resurrected in consciousness. And if you're in the middle of a hard season, if life feels like it's stripping you down, if Saturn is pressing on you, if you feel like something in you is dying, know this: the tomb is not the end. It's the threshold. It's the place where the old you is laid to rest, so the new you can rise. Neville said, "Do not be afraid to die daily." I tell you the same. Die to the doubt. Die to the fear. Die to the story that says you are small, or stuck, or separate. Because every death in consciousness is a doorway, and on the other side of that doorway is the you that you have been imagining all along. If this exploration has stirred something in you, if it's reminded you of a truth you've always known, then I invite you to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It's a small act, but it keeps this work alive, and I am deeply grateful for every one of you who walks this path with us. You are the resurrection. Not someday, not symbolically, now. Tonight, before you sleep, dare to die to the old state, dare to assume the new, and trust the pattern that every tradition has pointed to: death, rest, and rising. The tomb is imagination. The stone is rolled away when assumption becomes fact. And the voice that calls you forth is your own I Am, speaking with all the authority of God. Try it. The world will confirm it, because consciousness is the only reality, and you are the resurrection and the life. Sleep in the wish fulfilled, and wake as someone new.